The Prime Minister also spoke today about dairy farmers, insisting they will receive or see compensation in the coming weeks or months. That's after Canada gave up 3.6% of its dairy market to U.S. producers under a new trade agreement with the U.S. and Mexico. How much compensation might they need? And at what point did the federal government decide to make the concessions on dairy? Joining me now from Montreal is Raymond Bachand. He served as Quebec's chief negotiator in the NAFTA negotiations. Hi, Mr. Bachand. Great to see you again.
Good afternoon. Nice to see you.
So Canada's agricultural minister today said that Canada had to compromise on dairy if it wanted a trade deal with the U.S., that there was no way around it. Do you agree?
I agree with you. It became very clear that the President of the United States would never make a deal if he didn't get something strong from automobile from Mexico and to stop the erosion of production to Mexico and in milk in Canada. Now, at the onset, a year ago, they wanted to destroy the supply management system. So what's the interest of Canada and Quebec? Let's speak for Quebec. Our number one interest at the onset was to maintain market access to the United States. This is the richest market in the world. We're in the major leagues, speaking in sports, and it's hard to come back. In Montreal Expos, we won't get back in the major leagues for a while time. For Quebec only, we sell $60 billion per year. We import $30 billion. In agriculture, we sell $6 billion and import $1.5 billion. There's millions of jobs in Canada on this market access, and that was achieved, basically. I'd say we also had our Canadian identity, and that's a cultural exemption, because what's free trade? It's no tariffs and no discrimination against the foreigner. But the cultural exemption enables us, Canada and Quebec, and Ontario was a strong proponent of that, to basically discriminate and finance your cultural industries and your movie and your theaters and things like that. Thirdly, of course, we're in your major league. Sometimes people cheat, so you need arbitration. And that was fundamental in there. And last week, finally, the Americans gave in and we kept our arbitration chapters, Chapter 19s and 20. And in the new agreement, we have all sorts of provisions on the rights for workers and their wages. And Mexico has agreed to change some of its laws. And we've got equality for women, and we've got rights for the First Nations, Aboriginal people, some environmental provisions. Now, in order to get that, there would never have been a deal, coming back to your question, if we didn't give something on dairy. From supply management, it came to market access on milk. The federal government decided on the percentage it would give. And there's a cost for that. And I'm happy Prime Minister Trudeau was there today, because if you take the three agreements together, basically dairy farmers have lost 8 to 10% of their market over a 5-year period. That's a big loss, and I think we as Canadians have to compensate that and maybe invest in modernizing also our farm system so it'd be more productive.
How did the level of access granted, though, sit with you, especially in this specific agreement? I know you're saying over the, if you combine the three, that is a lot. But the dairy farmers that we're hearing from say this is a lot too, kind of this idea of death by 1,000 cuts.
Well, the total of them is 8 to 10%, depending on the categories of products and things like that, and that is a lot in a sense. That's why we as taxpayers have to help them, because we, or the federal government, decided to change the rule of the game, so they have to compensate them and maybe work with them also in a plan to have a more modern farm system. And that was a federal decision. Of course, we didn't want to give that, but I do recognize that if there hadn't been access to the dairy market, there would have been no deal.
How early was that decided?
Oh, I think that was decided in the last 2 weeks. Because there was a strong resistance and basically on protection of supply management throughout the negotiations.
And I guess from where you sat, what was it like for you as the representative for Quebec, where so many of these farmers live and so many of them will be impacted? How did that last 2 weeks unfold for you?
Well, basically, you knew you were coming. There was a real deadline. For the first time in a year and a half, President Trump wanted to make a deal, because there were all sorts of deadlines, which were deadlines the Americans put on the table. But I think wisely, Canadians, we said that's not a real legal deadline. Now, September 30th was not a real legal deadline, but the U.S. administration made it a deadline because they want to sign the deal with Mexico and with us on November 30th, and they have to publish it 60 days earlier in their law. So, and when the other party wants a deal, has its self-imposed deadline, maybe it's an opportunity to make a deal, and I think the federal negotiators took that opportunity, gave some milk, and then the rest fell through. The Americans gave us our cultural exemption, gave us the arbitration, and some other issues that were there, and finally the deal was made.
When you say compensation, I'm wondering how much in your mind is adequate. And I ask because, of course, under the original TPP, the Harper government allotted something like $4 billion. Do you think this is going to have to be in that neighborhood?
Be very frank, I don't know. If you look at the amounts, it seems to be similar amounts, but you have to have a real examination of in which category was the milk given. Is it in butter and cheese? What kind of cheese? In yogurt, and then come up with basically the losses for the Canadian industry. But it's a big amount of money, and you have to say that they haven't seen the color of their money in the TPP yet, I think. So they're quite angry. And if you're a farmer, and they're business people today, and you have to invest, you have to modernize, at least now you're going to have certainty for the next 15 to 20 years, for 16 years, on the environment in the 3 largest markets. So you can start planning, but if we've taken away 8% of their business and the value of the quotas at the end of the day, yes, it'd be only fair to compensate.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you about just one of the larger criticisms that Canada signed on to the deal without getting rid or securing an exemption from the 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum. Was that a mistake?
I don't think it was a mistake. You know, there's issues on the tariffs. They're still going to be negotiated in the next few weeks. Softwood lumber's in arbitration. We avoided future tariffs on cars with the quota system. And basically, aluminum and steel are there now. We have to get rid of them. And I think the pressure is building in the United States for them to get rid of them because it's hurting them also. And I'm hopeful that it's going to be solved in the next few weeks. But I think you wouldn't have had a deal Sunday if we had insisted on doing that at that point in time. But I think the pressure is going to build for that to being solved in the next few weeks.
Okay, I have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your time, Mr. Bachand.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
You too.